I really love the West County, and I love my neighbors and the places that I live. But I see two things going on. A lot of things, but one is that every time something is sold up on the hill where I live, I see these little sandwich board signs come up. Instead of a moving van that comes in, it's a sandwich board sign that's weekend after weekend after weekend with people who are Airbnb-ing their way through Sonoma County. They don't care. There's garbage all over the place. It's noisy, and there's no neighbors. There's nobody there during the week most of the time. So that's the whole Airbnb mess. And then there's my concern about groundwater management. The aquifers are being drained to death by various agricultural things, mostly vineyards, that move in, and then people have to drill their well again because they've lost their water. And I feel like this, I guess I want to say is, I don't feel like this job, our supervisor job, is an on-the-job training program. I want someone for my supervisor who knows what they're doing and can hit the ground running and knows who to call about everything. And I'm really concerned about those two issues and others. Thank you.
So I'll divide your question into two parts if I could. One is the Airbnb and what do we do about that issue in the 5th District. And then the second one is groundwater management. Airbnb, you probably already know that Susan Gorin did really a lot of work in trying to craft an ordinance for the county. The county essentially decided to adopt a certain ordinance for the Sonoma Valley and then for the area around Healdsburg and James Gore's district, but really kind of left the 5th District alone. And perhaps that's the right thing to do, because as I mentioned before, I think that the 5th District really has its own challenges, and we have our own individual needs here. And traditionally, a lot of the communities in the river and on the coast have been vacation communities. But what has happened is that's changed. And I mentioned before that like our roads weren't built to accommodate the traffic that is being used. We're no longer communities that can afford to have so many of our homes in Airbnb or in vacation rentals because we have this affordable, or actually we have a housing crisis. It's just housing, not affordable housing, it's just housing of all levels. So a couple of tools that we have. One is that Airbnbs right now are not necessarily being licensed and taxed. So they should be. They should be licensed, they should be taxed, they should be regulated. And in those parts of the county where there are over-concentration of Airbnb, which could potentially happen here, we need to be enforcing the rules. And right now, the county agency that is in charge of enforcing the rules is not funded to have a code enforcement officer on duty on evenings and weekends. So that also spills into the event center problem because the rules simply are not being enforced. So license, tax, and regulate, and look at reducing the number of Airbnbs and increasing the number of homes available to year-round residents, which is what our community needs. With respect to groundwater management, when I was in the state legislature, it took us years, but we finally passed what's known as the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Huge piece of legislation. We are now in the process of complying with the mandates of that act. So Sonoma County is currently studying and quantifying the amount of groundwater that we have. You would think it'd be common sense we ought to know, right? Because we're allowing all these wells to go in all over the county, but we don't know. We don't know how much water is in our aquifers or where it's going. So we're in the process of doing that. And once we have done that, the directors of the water agency, which are the supervisors, are going to have to figure out how we manage that. So we have a couple of coming challenges. One is we allowed, at our request, agriculture to be exempted from drought rules. So there were no restrictions, even though you had to limit your use. We can't do that anymore. We can no longer afford to do that, and cannabis is going to take more water too. So my time is up, but there's a lot to talk about that.
So I don't think we have tremendously different views on groundwater management or Airbnb, and so I'm going to take the opportunity to rebut your attack that you finished with at the end of your question, and that is regarding experience. I spent 5 years covering county government. I can guarantee you that I have sat through more Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Adjustments, and Board of Supervisors meetings, and I have really seen the way that the sausage is made. County government is tremendously different from state. It is tremendously different from city. And it really takes understanding what it's like to live in unincorporated Sonoma County, where your supervisor is your only, first and last stop. I will also add that I spent 6 years at Stanford studying land use policy and actually also studying our coastal and river ecosystems. And so in terms of the knowledge that it takes to get through that 8-volume long EIR and the sort of actual scientific data analysis, I have that down. I did that. I actually took those nutrient sort of measurements in the Daintree River in Australia, and I actually studied the way that industry and agriculture sort of interacted with that river, which then interacted with the Great Barrier Reef, which is one of the most sensitive ecosystems in the world. In an interesting way, our system actually isn't so different, because we are also impacted by tourism and agriculture and industry, and we also have a tremendously sensitive ecosystem that is dying right now off our coastline. We've seen a 90% reduction in kelp forests. And I will finish by saying that this is on-the-job training for no matter who gets elected, because county supervisor is so different. You are working with 4 other human beings. I will add that when I first declared my candidacy, I sat down with every single current sitting supervisor to introduce myself. I actually met with David Rabbit a couple months ago, and he was surprised that you hadn't actually reached out and sat down with him. I think it's very important to sit down with everyone, regardless of whether or not they get along with you. So I will just say that it is going to be on-the-job training. It was on-the-job training for Ernie Carpenter and for Mike Riley, because this position is so different than anything else. And I have watched it happen for 5 years and heard really the on-the-record story and the off-the-record story, which is one of the biggest reasons that I'm running for office, because there is so much that happens in the good old boys clubs behind closed doors that should be out in public with the community. So I do think that no matter what, we're all going to be learning on the job.